you, friends, for being here. There's a mood that crops up sometimes among Quakers today, a kind of doomsday mood. I've heard many friends voice fears they harbor inside, that the Religious Society of Friends is coming to an end, burning to the ground, the whole thing threatening to collapse, eventually to sputter out like a dying fire. Our numbers are shrinking. Our median age is rising. Our efforts to bring in young people, families, children, people of color seem to be coming to nothing. Most telling of all, even when new people come, many of them don't stay. Evidently, we're not offering what would feed them. The fear for the future is especially acute among liberal friends. We've had such high hopes and aspirations, a vision of what we can be and what we can offer, but those things seem less and less possible now. There's such a rich history, centuries of it, of friends serving as guides for national and international conscience, and leaders for social justice and peace, but now we often feel unheard. It's kind of like, what if we had a religion and nobody came? But there's also another theme I hear among friends, that there is opportunity in our situation. There's excitement for what we may be able to create out of this time of uncertainty. A narrowed set of resources can be a powerful force to ignite ingenuity. The less you have to work with, the more your creativity matters. When the old ways aren't working anymore, we can choose to open our minds and hearts to what we should keep and what we need to change. Maybe we have a chance to reinvent ourselves. At the 2023 Quaker Institute last May, friends from all over and from lots of Quaker organizations came together around the Institute's theme, the future of the Religious Society of Friends. The phrase, "let it burn," came up again and again, spoken in various tones as friends played with all its possible meanings. It started in vocal ministry, and as I composed this talk, I asked the person through whom that ministry came for his recollection of it. Here's his reply. "I spoke in meeting about letting it burn, that it was helping me to see it as a natural process when things change in the Quaker community, as meetings close and so on. That phrase first came to my attention in protest chants and had a more violent feel to me, which I did not like. But sitting silent in meeting that day, I was reminded of how the pine forests of my native North Carolina would regularly burn only to bring forth new life. So I was comforted now by that phrase and that process that lets the old burn away, leaving room for the new." We've seen all too many of these images lately. Although fire is a natural occurrence that's actually needed occasionally to renew forests, too much fire, too often, threatens the natural order as well as people and property. And the really bad news is that these images are only the beginning of what's to come. But what about controlled or managed burns? These are engineered to enhance the health of the forest and lower the likelihood of a destructive fire. They seem to destroy, but actually they renew forests while preserving the safety of people and property nearby. National Geographic Society says this: by ridding a forest of dead leaves, tree limbs, and other debris, a prescribed burn can help prevent a destructive wildfire. Controlled burns can also reduce insect populations and destroy invasive plants. In addition, fire returns nutrients to the soil in the ashes of vegetation that could otherwise take years to decompose. And after a fire, the additional sunlight and open space in a forest can help young trees and other plants start to grow. The U.S. Forest Service adds that controlled burns remove unwanted species that threaten species native to an ecosystem. This means that forests managed with controlled burns can remain rich in the native plants, insects, and animals that create healthy biodiversity. So what would happen if we were to apply the metaphor of the controlled burn to the Religious Society of Friends today? What may be crowding out the native species of our faith? Where are we overburdened with potentially invasive plants, decomposing refuge, and spindly underbrush? What is blocking the light? Friends are approaching our current dilemma in various ways. We turn to practical considerations. With dwindling numbers of members and attenders, can we uphold our practical and financial commitments? Does our committee structure still work? Meanwhile, hybrid worship has opened new conversations, both practical and spiritual. How can we foster gathered worship when we're not all in the same room? What happens to Friends community when worship is only on Zoom? Is deep spiritual connection even possible in a world where people move on average every 5 years? Some friends are wondering what membership in a meeting means when people feel connected to meetings far from them. Young people who move away but still feel their spiritual home is with the friends who nurtured them as children. People who discover Quakers through online worship and live far from any meeting. People who worship with various communities online and develop multiple allegiances rather than only one. Friends' growing understanding of the effects of systemic racism is another source of questions. As white friends come to recognize the ways in which we participate in a racist system, our claim of immunity from the injustices of our society is unmasked as the delusion born of insular privilege it has always been. Now we get to questions that are more than formal, more than structural. Where has our blindness failed to make us patterns and examples so that we walk cheerfully over the earth, over the world, answering that of God in everyone? I think it's important to point out that none of these questions negate the foundation of the Quaker faith. I'm convinced that in the metaphor of the forest, our roots are sound. And moreover, opening to these questions has strengthened that conviction in me. A forest needs fire periodically, not because it's fundamentally flawed. In fact, the opposite is true. A forest needs fire now and then in order to keep it growing true to its essential nature. It may look changed after a fire, with trees and other plants shaped differently from how they were before, but it's still the same forest. I think we need to remember that probing deeply into the failures of our current practice does not pose a threat, but rather the opposite. It offers the opportunity to discover what is essential and what is extraneous, to discern who we really are and what may be obscuring that essence from view. Friends are getting creative in response to our shrinking numbers. There's a large meeting in Philadelphia that's considering a proposal to disband most committees and reorganize the meeting's tasks into a small number of areas, Each area would have a point person who would commit to a 3-year term and organize what needs to be done. Other people could volunteer for specific tasks. Certain responsibilities formerly held by committees would be assumed by the meeting as a whole. Newcomers could begin to participate more easily, and friends could explore various parts of the meeting's work by circulating among the areas. The hoped-for result would be more inclusiveness, wider participation, and greater community. Another place for innovation is membership. The traditional model in which friends are eligible for membership only in a local meeting they attend in person has developed permeable edges in these days of mobility and online connections. New York Yearly Meeting and Philadelphia Yearly Meeting offer at-large membership, meaning that the person is a member of the yearly meeting, but not of a particular monthly meeting. Meetings in Ohio Yearly Meeting have long offered affiliate membership, which allows friends to join a monthly meeting far from them. These are just some examples of the ways in which friends are responding to the recognition that some of our customary structures have become leggy, like the saplings and the plants on the forest floor. They're ways of seizing opportunity instead of succumbing to fear. But as one friend pointed out to me, this kind of adaptation is like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, unless we also tend to the spiritual essence of our faith and the practices that nurture it. What makes the Religious Society of Friends work, what makes it last, what makes it strong, what makes it grow, is not our corporate structure, but how we tend our faith. So how are we doing on that score? In the words of the familiar query, how fares the Spirit with us? The financial advisor for my retirement account had cancer a few years ago, and I told him I'd be holding him in the light. He found the phrase so charming that ever since he closes our conversations with, "And I'll be holding you in the light." I have to admit to you that this bothers me. He's being kind, and I do appreciate that. But it makes me aware of how easily friends' language can be trivialized, taking along with it the experiences it describes. Holding someone in the light sounds cozy. I can imagine it conjuring for him images of people cuddling beside a fireplace on a winter night while snow falls in the darkness outside. But the meaning of "I'll hold you in the light" depends entirely on what we know light to be. My financial advisor hears it as a quaint metaphor. He says it gaily, evoking the festive kind of light that comes from chandeliers and twinkle lights. Friends' practice, however, cultivates our encounter with something far more powerful than that. The light I've experienced as a friend is cozy some of the time, but it can also be challenging, astonishing, severe, even brutal. Sometimes it feels like the glowing embers in a fireplace, but other times it feels like the spotlight they shine into the faces of people in a police lineup. Disorienting, accusatory, painful, and relentless. Now, my advisor is a religious person. He attends an evangelical Christian church and lives faithfully to its teachings, so he's not at all making fun of me. I think maybe one reason we're kind of talking past each other is that his theology tells him he's waiting for the second coming, and mine tells me it's already happened. For him, Jesus Christ lived long ago, died on the cross, rose into heaven, and someday in the future will return to earth. For me as a friend, the risen Christ, or in other language, the divine, the Holy Spirit, is present with us here and now, not an abstraction separate from everyday human life, but a reality that coexists on the same plane. The light that to my advisor is a metaphor for something distant, to me denotes an actuality that I believe I can experience directly at every moment. And of course, light is a metaphor. We have to turn to metaphor for things that are beyond the reach of words. But those who have experienced it know that the word light is a paltry placeholder for the immanent divine presence. Metaphor can oversimplify, and worse, by using items from the physical secular world to describe something that in truth lies far beyond materiality, metaphor risks secularizing religious experience. Over the centuries, friends have developed ways to delineate the secular world from the sacred space we cultivate together, to remind us of what we're up to. There are tools we're not using very much these days, tools that can help us receive the light individually and together. True corporate discernment is one, not consensus, but sense of the meeting, gained from everyone doing the internal work to recognize when they're being driven by their own opinion or desire, and setting that aside to make room to hear the Spirit. When it comes to turning points like seeking membership or a new career or direction, corporate discernment of each other's leadings may seem invasive in this era of I'm okay, you're okay, but it's essential to both community and integrity. Another neglected tool is eldering, and I mean eldering in its traditional sense as mentoring and spiritual companionship, not as criticism or power-mongering, which have no place in sacred space. Another tool is inquiring into each other's spiritual state, asking one another nosy questions like, how fares the Spirit with you? These aren't practices that you'd ever encounter in the secular world, where it's considered impolite to ask after someone's beliefs and weak to relinquish your private interest in how a decision turns out. But we need these practices precisely because they're not normal in our society. They help to create a countercultural sacred space. What bothers me about my financial advisor's festive, I'll hold you in the light, is that it secularizes the sacred. And when we allow our spiritual experience to be secularized by others, or worse, when we secularize it ourselves, we lose the essence of our faith. We strip it of its power and relinquish the spiritual wisdom that friends have gathered over centuries of faithfulness. This, friends, is the threatened destruction among us that frightens me the most. When Moses encountered the burning bush, he was not a holy person. He'd murdered someone, in fact, and he was biding his time by taking care of his father-in-law's sheep. His concerns were all about the ordinary world, staying under cover, not getting caught, and keeping those sheep safe. But then he saw this bush on fire, with a fire that didn't consume the bush, and he entered a different dimension of reality. A dimension where the rules of physics didn't apply. This dimension was closely adjacent to the one he was living in, so close that it was natural and easy to slip from the one to the other. All of a sudden, out there in the field, in the middle of the day, he was talking with God. And what did God say first after calling Moses' name? Take off your shoes, because this is holy ground. Taking off your shoes before entering a sacred space was customary, but this ground was literally part of the field where the sheep were doing all their normal sheep things, some of which aren't to be spoken of in polite conversation. It was the most ordinary place that this biblical writer's audience would have known. That was the holy ground, because God was there. Oh. 3 more slides. This story reminds me that holiness is here on earth, always and everywhere. People tend to get so caught up with everyday life that we don't notice the holiness a lot of the time. So we imagine that there has to be fanfare around entering holy space. Humans have built all kinds of amazing architectural masterpieces as holy places, and then behaved as if the rest of the earth isn't holy. Quakers' practices and language are pretty insistent about everyday life being holy. We don't consecrate our worship spaces with ceremonies, and we can worship anywhere. We don't treat people according to where they fall in any worldly hierarchy. We treat everyone as children of God. We use bland terms like clerk and meeting to make our religious practices as ordinary as possible, in the imagery of the burning bush story, to show that the sheep field and the holy ground are one and the same. But there's danger in this. We ourselves can forget that those terms and the simplicity of our worship are reminders of the holiness of the ordinary world and not the other way around. The very plainness of our practices can make them seem trivial. What's meant to sanctify the secular can ironically wind up secularizing the sacred. Words and practices that we borrow from the secular world come with associations that can distort what's happening. When we begin vocal ministry with "Good morning, friends," and end with "Thank you, friends," we're evoking a public address rather than the outpouring of a message from God, and we move for a moment from the meeting room to the boardroom. Similarly, thanking someone for their ministry places them in the role of preacher rather than as the faithful reporter of what was given to them during worship. Verbal customs like these make me wonder what we understand the nature of vocal ministry to be. Has vocal ministry become merely a vehicle for sharing our thoughts? But this goes deeper. Vocal ministry isn't even the heart of the issue. Worship itself is. What habits are we bringing to worship? Are we keeping it sacred, or are we secularizing it too? It's become fairly common among liberal friends to refer to worship as meditation or as sitting. Certainly there are overlaps, and meditation skills can help us center and settle into worship. But meditation is about opening to whatever we can access beyond our normal perception, while worship is about opening specifically to connection with something transcendent, whether we call that God or spirit or the divine. In addition, ultimately meditation is individual. It can be done in the company of others, but it doesn't court connection with them. Worship, on the other hand, is corporate. A worship community gathers knowing that each person is important to the experience of all, and that each person's experience may be intensified by being part of the group. In meeting for worship, our individual experiences can become part of a collective one. We all participate together in opening to the divine, and in doing so, we can experience the spirit in which we live and breathe and that lives and breathes in us. The gathered or covered meeting, I think, is the clearest demonstration of the distinction between meditation and worship. There's a story among friends about the newcomer who remarked to a friend that Quakers have created a religion made up entirely of laity, a religion that does away with ministers. The friend replies, "It's the opposite. We've done away with the laity. We're all ministers." This, friends, is why it's so important that each of us maintains the sacredness of our practice. We are the keepers of this faith, and we have to remember to take off our shoes. How can we do this? Well, there are practices that friends have found useful in maintaining the quality of worship. We can prepare before worship so that we're not rushing in agitated from the road or a podcast or a conversation that pulls our mind away. Preparation might be a bit of contemplative reading or a quiet walk or a breathing practice, whatever centers us and brings our focus toward the sacred. We can begin worship by setting aside whatever we may have brought with us. I like to imagine a big cardboard box open on the floor in front of me. I put every thought into the box as it arises. My box can get full of questions and worries and longings and concerns, but I know those things are safely held and will be there after worship if I need them, which I rarely do. So I can release them for the time being. We can use a breathing practice to arrive fully, and we can sit in open body position to receive what may come. We can close our eyes and search the room with our other senses, becoming viscerally aware of all those who are gathered with us. We can hold the whole room in the light that we know as love. With practices like these, we can cultivate the gathered worship that fulfills the promise, where two or more are gathered in my name, I am there among them. What might be possible then? Going back to the fire metaphor, remember that? George Fox referred to the flaming sword that cleaved him open. In the Bible story of the expulsion from Eden, God stationed cherubim armed with a flaming sword at the gate, so Adam and Eve couldn't return. Fox describes the spiritual renewal that came from his direct encounter with God by comparing it to coming back into paradise, out of the land of sin. Fox wrote in his journal, "Now I was come up in spirit through the flaming sword into the paradise of God. All things were new, and all the creation gave unto me another smell than before, beyond what words can utter. I know nothing but pureness and innocency and righteousness, being renewed into the image of God by Christ Jesus, to the state of Adam which he was in before he fell. The creation was opened to me." This is big stuff, friends. In his metaphor, Fox has traveled the path of Adam and Eve in reverse, moving from the everyday world into paradise, and he hasn't had to die to do it. Paradise is the state of being one with God, newly made by the awareness of being God's beloved creation. In paradise, not only were Adam and Eve innocent of sin, sin hadn't even been invented yet. This is the image that comes to my mind when I read Fox's passage about returning to Eden. This is Thomas Cole's painting called Expulsion from the Garden of Eden from 1828. Cole was a Hudson River School painter, and they used landscape to convey moral messages. In this painting, you can see Adam and Eve up above my finger, walking on a narrow stone bridge with this powerful light behind them, expelling them from a place that's a whole lot nicer than the one in front of them. This is where they're going. This is Cole's depiction of the world in which we all live. Now, he wasn't a Quaker. And this is where they came from. This is the Eden that George Fox says he was able to return to. This image helps me understand the significance of Fox's contention that he has been, as he said, renewed into the image of God by Christ Jesus to the state of Adam, which he was in before he fell. Pretty nice. However, and this is a big however, Fox went through a lot before he reached that state. The light searched him, and it showed him parts of himself he really didn't want to see, and that caused agony that he had to work through and changes he had to make in himself. Here's how he described what happened before his metaphorical return to Eden. "But oh, then did I see my troubles, trials, and temptations more than ever I had done. As the light appeared, all appeared that is out of the light. Darkness, death, temptations, the unrighteous, the ungodly, all was manifest and seen in the light. Then after this there did a pure fire appear in me. Then I saw how he sat as a refiner's fire and as fuller's soap. Then the spiritual discerning came into me, by which I did discern my own thoughts, groans, and sighs, and what it was that did veil me, and what it was that did open me. The light that illuminated Fox isn't the cozy one from the fireplace. It's the spotlight on the police lineup. It melts him, beats him, shows him everything in himself that he'd rather not see. It was by submitting to that light, allowing it to search him, and paying attention to what it showed him, that he was able to come, in his words, to Eden. It took a lot of work. Now, even though I don't share Fox's language, I have shared that experience. The very same spotlight shows me what in me is out of the light: darkness, death, temptations, the unrighteous, the ungodly. For me, it's fear and pride and ego and suspicion, the need to be right, concern for how I may look to others, frustration when I don't get my way, worry, impatience, materialism, competition, and lots of other habits that can even lead to success in the world, but that trip me up very effectively in my quest to be closer to God. I've come to realize that these habits are based on the illusion that there's not enough love to sustain me. I can trip myself up by forgetting that God's love is infinite. Infinite anything, including infinite love, isn't a reality in the material world, but it is in the spiritual one. My fear of not having enough is born of the secular experience of everyday life. In the sacred experience I can cultivate in worship, that fear goes up in smoke. You see what I did there? Friends, there is a fire at the core of the Quaker faith. It's a fire born of the literally awesome encounter with God that friends have experienced over and over. A fire that can fuel our liberation from all our troubles, trials, and tribulations. A fire that can illuminate that which is eternal to us, in us, for us, and for each other. A fire that lends a power far beyond our own to our actions to change the world. That fire is available, but I'm concerned that we may have become comfortable with keeping our distance from it. We hang around the edges of the heat it emanates, content with a little bit of warmth against the chill of the world around us. We've tamed an inferno and reduced it to a campfire. And we sit around the campfire telling stories that cheer us up and connect us in a contented fellowship while the glow of the fire lights up our faces. Everyone looks good in the glow of a campfire. But the campfire isn't enough to sustain us, nor is it enough to attract others or show them what the Quaker faith can offer. We need the light of that fire in its entirety, the cozy glow and the spotlight, even if it's uncomfortable and unsettling, even if it shows us parts of ourselves we find repulsive. This is a central promise of this religion, that if we open to the searching, transformative power of the light, we can transcend our separation from God. For me, this happens when I observe those hidden parts of myself and know that God loves me anyway. Yes, I'm selfish and judgmental and perfectionistic. Yes, I'm entitled and greedy, and my vision is excruciatingly limited. And yet, love, with a capital L, is available to me, with me, surrounding me, holding me every instant of my life. When I give myself over to that love, it forgives me, sustains me, and it directs my every action. And miraculously, I find myself less burdened by my troubles, trials, and temptations. Maybe I even become a little less selfish, a little less judgmental, a little less attached to my image and my reputation, a little more able to embody love. I feel freer as I come closer to what Fox called the paradise of God. I wonder if there's another meaning of the burning bush story. It does show that we're on holy ground, always and everywhere, and that the fire of God's love is never ending. And also, perhaps, it shows that when we open fully to the inward light, the burning bush can be within us as well as in front of us. This light that searches us is the epitome of love. The more we live in it and allow it to live in us, the more able we are to bring it through us into the world. Not only does it steady us and show us our path, it begins to illuminate all our actions, our interactions with everyone we meet, our daily work, our efforts for social justice, our parenting, our community with each other and with the world around us. That light, that embodied love, is what we have to offer each other and the world. If we open to it faithfully, we can trust it to lead us to a future we can anticipate with joy. Friends, what burns in you?
yourself to love.